Welcome back to the History Front, where we dive deep into the battles, leaders, and turning points that shaped our world. Today, we're taking you to the final, desperate days of World War II, into the ruins of Berlin. In April 1945, where the Nazi regime made its last stand. This is the story of the fall of Berlin, the brutal battle that ended Hitler's war and redrew the map of Europe. By early 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. On the Western Front, Allied forces had crossed the Rhine. In the east, the Soviet Red Army had already swept through Poland and now stood just 60 kilometers from Berlin. The once mighty Nazi war machine was broken. Its cities were in ruins, its armies shattered, but Berlin, the symbolic heart of Nazi power, still stood, waiting for the final blow. Adolf Hitler refused to flee. Instead, he withdrew to his underground bunker, vowing to fight to the bitter end. On April 16, 1945, the Red Army launched the Berlin Offensive, one of the largest and deadliest operations of the war. Marshal Georgy Zhukov led more than 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, backed by 6,000 tanks and 7,500 aircraft. The German defenders, barely 750,000, and many were untrained boys from the Hitler Youth, elderly men from the Volkssturm, and survivors of shattered Wehrmacht divisions. Ammunition was low, morale was worse. From the Oder River, Soviet artillery began pounding Berlin in waves. Entire city blocks vanished. Railways, hospitals, schools, everything was a target. Berliners took shelter underground, while the Soviet noose tightened around the city. By April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, Soviet shells were raining down on central Berlin. That day, Hitler greeted a group of Hitler Youth boys outside his bunker, a surreal moment that would be his final public appearance. Inside the bunker, Hitler's inner circle knew the truth. The war was lost, yet Hitler clung to fantasy, ordering non-existent divisions into imaginary counterattacks. He would not leave Berlin. He would not surrender. The Red Army pushed forward relentlessly, fighting street by street, building by building. Every block cost lives. Snipers, booby traps, and fanatical resistance made each advance slow and deadly. Meanwhile, panic gripped Berlin's civilian population. Thousands tried to flee west, to surrender to the Americans or British, fearing what the Soviets might do. For many, it was already too late. In the last days of April, the fighting reached the city center. The Reichstag, now just a symbolic ruin, became the ultimate prize. Soviet soldiers swarmed toward it, knowing Stalin wanted the red flag flying over the heart of the Nazi government. Inside the bunker, the situation collapsed. On April 28th, Hitler learned that Heinrich Himmler, his once loyal deputy, was trying to negotiate a surrender behind his back. Furious, he declared Himmler a traitor. The next day, he married his longtime companion, Eva Braun. It was a brief ceremony. Less than 40 hours later, both were dead. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives. Hitler shot himself. Eva took cyanide. Their bodies were burned by loyal staff in the garden above the bunker. Following Hitler's instructions, that same day, Soviet troops stormed the Reichstag, raising the red flag over its scorched dome. But the battle wasn't quite over. Some German units continued fighting even after Hitler's death. On May 1st, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, also took his life, along with his wife Magda, after they poisoned their 6 children in the bunker. On May 2nd, General Helmuth Weidling surrendered the city to the Soviets. The Battle of Berlin was finally over. The cost of this battle was staggering. Soviet casualties numbered over 300,000, more than 80,000 of them killed. German military losses were around 90,000 dead, and tens of thousands more were captured. Civilian casualties are estimated between 100,000 and 125,000 as the Soviets occupied the city. What followed was grim. Berliners suffered retaliation for the horrors committed by the Nazis in the east. There were widespread reports of looting, destruction, and mass sexual violence. The scars of this occupation would last for decades. On May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Western Allies in Reims, France, on May 8th. It was ratified in Berlin, marking Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. But for the Soviet Union, which signed in the early hours of May 9th due to the time difference, that date became Victory Day, a national holiday still celebrated in Russia today. Berlin's fall was the symbolic and strategic death of Nazi Germany. It ended the war in Europe, but it also marked the beginning of something else: the division of Germany, the Cold War, and the long struggle between East and West. The fall of Berlin wasn't just the end of a war, it was the end of an ideology, the collapse of a regime built on hatred, terror, and destruction. In its place rose a divided Europe, scarred, exhausted, but determined to rebuild. Thanks for watching the History Front. If you want more deep dives into pivotal moments like this, don't forget to subscribe. History isn't just what happened, it's why we're here.